Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Sonia Manzano to celebrate the publication of Coming Up Cuban, published by our friends at Scholastic Press. Sonia Manzano has affected the lives of millions since the early 1970s as the actress who defined the role of Maria on the acclaimed television series Sesame Street. Sonia has won 15 Emmy Awards for her television writing and is the recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Arts and Sciences. People magazine named Sonia one of America's most influential Hispanics. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Ruth Behar, an acclaimed author of adult fiction and nonfiction. Her first book for young readers, Lucky Broken Girl, won the Pura Belpré Award. She is also the author of Tia Fortuna's New Home, a Jewish-Cuban journey. She was born in Havana, Cuba, grew up in New York, and has also lived and worked in Spain and Mexico. Her newest picture book, Pepita Meets Bebita, co-written with her son, Gabriel Fry Behar, will be released in fall 2023 from Knopf, and we can't wait. Remember that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and we thank you for ordering your copy of Coming Up Cuban from Books and Books and supporting independent bookstores. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Sonia. Well, thanks to everybody for being with us tonight in celebration of Sonia Manzano and her latest book, Growing Up Cuban. I really admire you, Sonia, and I'm amazed by the wide range of work that you do, your talents as an actress, television writer, producer, and prolific author of children's books, as well as a wonderful memoir, Becoming Maria, Love and Chaos in the South Bronx. So it's truly an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight with you and at my favorite bookstore, Books and Books. So Sonia, to get things going and to add some context, could you give us a very brief synopsis of Coming Up Cuban without giving too much away, of course? And importantly, tell us what inspired you to write it. What was the urgency to write this book?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that I'm not Cuban. I'm Nuyorican of parents from Puerto Rico. And my smart Alex sister came up to me the other day and said, I didn't know you were Cuban because of the title of the book. The impulse of the book was I was at an event, at a book party, and an American citizen told me that his family had a chicken farm in Cuba in 1959. And when Castro came in, they had to leave their chicken farm, their home, and the family dog. Well, it was sad. I said, I'm sorry. He said, no worries. The dog showed up in Miami in a boat a few months later, and we were reunited. I thought it would make a lovely picture book. But as I read about the events of 1959 to sort of round out the picture book historically, I was just fell into this warren of interesting stories that included the Pedro Pan initiative, families being separated because of Castro's takeover. So I had to write about that. And then I thought, what about the children who stayed? So then I had to go do more research to find out about what Castro's initiatives, how they affected the children who stayed. So the book is 4 diverse stories.
Yeah, and I love that. I want to hear you talk more about that, about writing a middle grade novel from 4 points of view. It's such a great way to tell a story. And I just wonder what that process was like of creating the different characters, Ana, Miguel, Zulema, Juan. Plus, you actually created many minor yet very important characters who appear as family, as friends, as neighbors, as teachers, etc. All really fascinating characters. How did you go from conceiving this to then creating these amazing characters and to telling the story from these 4 points of view?
Well, first I started out with the facts. I knew that children were affected by the Brigadista program, the literacy program that Castro initiated. And I actually remember as a kid seeing him on television at the United Nations announcing this goal. And then I thought, what else affected children who stayed? And then there was the Pioneros program that militarized what was going on in their schools. And of course, the most compelling was Pedro Pan, where 14,000 unaccompanied minors were sent to the United States. And what happened to descendants of the rebels and who were disillusioned very shortly after Castro took over, because things changed. I was struck by how quickly things changed. And I put myself in the position of those children. If I had to leave everything at a moment's notice. And when I spoke to people who were Pedro Panners, they said, we went shopping for shoes. And the next thing I know, I'm on a plane and I end up in Queens. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't imagine what that's like. So I put myself in those 4 stories. The Pedro Pan child, the girl who has to leave with her mother and leave everything behind, the Guajira who's illiterate and yearning for options, and Juan who's Afro-Cubano. And I wanted to talk about, I wanted them to be as different as possible. So they're white, they're rich, upper middle class, country, and poor. And I want to show or illustrate that one event has a ripple effect on many lives.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful, because I think sometimes people want a black or white decision about Cuba, and there are all these nuances, as you show, and these different ways that people react, and in this case that kids reacted, which I think is so important, and that some of them were aware that they were being quote unquote brainwashed. Others instead saw a very idealistic possibility with the revolution, and that these are all legitimate points of view. They were different, and you showed how people came from these different backgrounds, and that affected how they responded to the revolution. And I think that was really, really important, and a really important and interesting contribution. Along those lines, I wanted to ask you, as somebody who has been studying, Cuban history and culture for a long time and traveling to Cuba, the Cuban Revolution happened over 60 years ago. Why is that history still important today? And why do you think kids coming up American need to know about it?
I know, it's interesting, because you tell a kid about something that happened in 1959, you might as well be talking about dinosaurs. I mean, that is such a long time ago. The Pedro Panners are my age now, so that puts things in perspective. But people don't change. People are the same. And if I connected to Zulema as an impoverished girl yearning, those are my feelings, those are her feelings, and children feel those things today. Children are separated from their families today. That is happening now, as we know, in the United States. So there's many parallels that I didn't mean to touch upon, but that have been coming forth. And I think that we live in a society now that there's no nuance. As you said, it's either black or white. Nobody can discuss things. And I'm hoping that people who read this book will want to discuss the lives of these 4 children and think, I would have done this, or I would have stayed, or I would have gone, or I would have told my mother this, and allow them to have a discourse of it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Very, very much. Regarding this, I guess going on with that, what would you say is the central message of the book? And I was intrigued by all the epigraphs were from Jose Marti. How does Jose Marti play into this story? And what do you hope the book will evoke in young readers? What kind of empathy or compassion, or what kind of emotional, I guess, truth do you want them to get out of the story?
I think it's funny. I think that Jose Marti said something about everything. And the only person that I think of Lin-Manuel Miranda, who says something, his words or his quotes, or can be used in many places, like be the person in the room. And well, Jose Marti sort of summarizes education, which is Zulema's issue, and be your own person, which is Juan's issue, and so on and so forth. But I hope that readers see that we're all individuals and that there are many stories. I think of myself as a Puerto Rican, and you always think like, well, the Puerto Rican story is my story. When my parents came and how they worked, and that's the Puerto Rican story. But it's not the only story. It's one. I remember the comic that went out to do a show in San Francisco, and she said, 1,000,000 San Franciscoans, one story. And she was referring to people leaving their hometowns to live a free life in San Francisco. It was Bette Midler, the comic. Ha ha ha, one story. But there's many stories. I only wrote 4. There are 1,000 more stories that I touched upon. There was the kids who went back to Cuba, who were angry that their parents had sent them. Right. Who were in a rage, who thought their culture was taken away from them. There are the people who stayed, who obviously stay and want to and defend the regime. That was interesting for me to find out. So I was weighing everything, but I didn't want to promote any one attitude. I wanted all of the characters to speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And they do, and very, very forcefully. And that's what I love about the book, is these 4 different young voices, and how much information you're able to pack into each of the stories. Even though they're very strong as stories, you're still giving us so much context and really letting us know like what life was like at that moment.
Yes, I remembered, for example, that my mother used to tell me that poor people in Puerto Rico lived in houses with dirt floors, and they used to sweep the floors, packed up dirt. And I thought, oh, that's something that probably happened, with all my research in Cuba at that time too. So I put that story in. I even tried to get Dizzy Gillespie in, because Juan has no parents. And I said, well, what happened to his parents? I thought, I know, they're musicians when Dizzy Gillespie came to Cuba, and he popularized Cuban music and jazz. But I couldn't get it in the right time frame. But I did want to enrich it. And also I wanted to always imply that there was a connection to the United States, that they watched Bugs Bunny cartoons. That I asked my friend Luis Santiago, who's a writer for Sesame Street. He wrote a book called Dancing with Dictators, and I loved his book. And I would ask him, what did you see in the movies? And it was American movies mostly, when you were there. So I wanted to imply that there was always a line between Cuba and the United States.
Definitely, and that's why we have all of those American cars in Cuba. Yes, one of the clearest symbols of that presence. Yeah, and it's true. In American movies and cartoons and so on were huge in Cuba before the revolution, and that's why they also created their own national, cinematic organization, right? The ICAIC, to make, movies in Cuba by Cubans, right? That was a very important part of like the early, revolutionary movement, like Memories of Underdevelopment, which is one of the movies that you mentioned in your list at the end of the book, right? That was one of the movies that came out of that desire to create a Cuban national cinema, speaking back to this American presence that had been on the island for so long.
You might find this interesting. I wanted a comedic character, and I put in a lot of knock-knock jokes in one character in Miguel's story. Comico says a lot of knock-knock jokes, but one of my Cuban advisors said, what is this knock-knock joke? This is not Cuban. We don't do knock-knock jokes. So I said, well, what do you suggest? And she turned me onto a book that was Cuban humor during the revolution. It was jokes based on the revolution. It was like, some of it went because it was in Spanish, and so the nuances of it somehow escaped me. But this whole Cuban humor, I was able to translate that into this character. And, the humor is very much like Jewish humor that comes out of despair. Those jokes were like that too. And I kind of cleaned them up a little bit. I couldn't make them too despairing because of the age group, but still a little.
No, that was great. That character Comico is wonderful. And the way he comes back again in the latter part of that story is really great. Yeah. So you wove in so much. It's so masterful.
Thank you.
You did that. Yeah, I guess following on some of these topics, and I'm going to ask you to read a little bit too from your book if you'd like to. So, but I have a bunch more questions. Let me try to get a few more of them in. I'm really fascinated by the way you represent the range of race and class positions in Cuba and among immigrant Cubans in that period in 59-61. And you also show the cultural and religious diversity. You incorporate both Santeria and the role of the Catholic Church and education, everyday life, and of course in the Peter Pan operation. So if you can tell us a little bit more about how all of that came to be in the book.
When I was a kid in the South Bronx, in the benighted South Bronx, there was this one Cuban guy, and he was Black. And I assumed that all Cubans were Black, because this was the only Cuban guy I knew, and they called him Cuba. It was in the old days when wherever you were from, that was your name in the street. If you were from Caguas, you were called Caguas. So he was called Cuban. So I thought that and of course the music, all the album covers that I saw of albums from Cuba were Arsenio Rodriguez, and they were Afro-Cubanos, and that kind of made me believe that more. Well, obviously I was wrong. There's white people and people who look indigenous in Cuba. So I wanted to show all of that in the book, and of course I wanted to pay homage to Afro-Cubanos in this in this moment, and talk about Santeria, and because that was also very interesting when I read that Castro wanted to do away with religion.
Yes.
And Ana, the kind of middle class girl, goes to Catholic school, and she's saying, but she's making decisions. She's saying, wait a minute, but we go to Catholic school. Why can't these people do Santeria? And, and those are questions that somebody who's 12 might certainly ask as these things unfold in front of her. And I find the Cuban culture so rich. So much is going on. I mean, I tried to get Alicia Alonso in it too. One of the girls said, wait a minute, stop. You can't get it all in here. But I find the culture so rich, and in so many ways. I wanted to put in as much of that as possible.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, I love the references to Babalu Aye and so on. I mean, I love that all of that was in there because it felt very real.
Yeah, when I was a kid, you didn't, but there was an exhibit at the Museum of Natural History of Santeria in New York. So it's more out in the open. It wasn't when I was little, but it certainly is now. Yeah. And I had great help with the Cuban Heritage Collection in Miami. Because you're in Miami, I have to give a shout out to that organization. They were very helpful.
Yeah. They're wonderful. They have material from all aspects of Cuba, all political perspectives and so on. And it's their collection's amazing. Yeah. Let me ask you, what was the research process like? So you have this historical timeline at the end of the book and this great list of readings and films. And I wondered, since you mentioned this before, how much of the Cuban context was familiar to you from your knowledge of Puerto Rico, and how much was distinctive to Cuba? It's been said by the Puerto Rican poet Lola Rodriguez de Tio, and I quote, "The Cuba and Puerto Rico are two wings of one bird. They receive flowers or bullets in the same heart." So what did you learn about the similarities and differences between our two islands?
Right. Well, I always felt that we were like sisters. Like if Puerto Ricans came to the mainland because of poverty, searching for a better way of life, and people who were not poor stayed, what happened in Cuba was the exact opposite, except people who had means had to leave because of political persecution.
Mhm.
And the people who were impoverished stayed. So it kind of flipped it a little bit. But I always felt that we were sisters, and I always felt that the Afro-Cuban and Afro-Puerto Rican sensibility was similar, even though the music is different in Puerto Rico. There's bomba and plena is more African than the than the music of Cuba. But there's this lovely mixture, and I think the music had a big impact on me when I was a kid, and that was sort of my first impression of what Cuba was. Cuba was where all those charts came that turned into salsa, that we turned into salsa, in New York. And I know that because there was a fabulous record called Pacheco y su Charanga. And Pacheco is Dominican, so that's another one in the Caribbean. And this was a big hit. I grew up and I see the same album from Cuba, and I realized that Pacheco, they had taken the same music exactly from this album and rearranged it and gave it that salsa rhythm. So the lush violins were gone and the were in. So that was my one version of Cuba, and then I think it'll always be music, to tell you the truth. But then it expanded when I was able to read all the history about it.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Mambo Kings play songs of love, those carijuelos.
Yes, yes.
Well,
yes.
yeah, and that whole 50s merging of Cuban and Puerto Rican music and culture at that time, and Santeria as well, kind of connecting all the musicians in the 50s as well.
I try to make a joke when Ana, moves into Washington Heights. She says, like, what is it like living with all these Puerto Ricans? And, and both two characters in the book learn English from Puerto Ricans because we speak so much Spanglish.
I love how you wove that in, both in that section and in Miguel's story.
Miguel's story too.
We've been the Cuban-Puerto Rican connection, which I thought was great. Yeah, I love that. I guess related to this, among the many things that I loved about Coming Up Cuban was how you incorporated two stories of characters who left Cuba and then two stories of characters who stayed in Cuba. And you talked about this dynamic before. And I've been very interested in this kind of thing. I was, created a project called Bridges to Cuba many years ago. And I was interested in creating bridges between the island and the diaspora and seeing them always as being very interconnected to one another. So I wonder if you can speak to that question you've been alluding to, why it's important to write in a way that pays attention to these bridges and intersections between those who stay and those who leave.
I think that the only stories is the only way that we can connect with each other, through stories. I think that we certainly let the youth down lately. We can't keep them safe in schools. We can't help them go to college. What can we do? In your field, in my field, the only thing we can do is give them stories. And when you hear a story about another person, you get another point of view, and you are not so overwhelmed. When I was a child being overwhelmed, I would find solace in a Nancy Drew book. And now imagine, what do I have to do with Nancy Drew? Or Beverly Clearly, a book 15. I love that book. About a white middle-class girl. What does it have to do with the Puerto Rican in the Bronx? But she disobeyed her mother, and she tried to make up for it by cleaning the house. I did that too. So all of a sudden, me and this kid in this Beverly Clearly's book 15, we got something going on together. I understand her perfectly because that's the exact thing that I did. So I think that's how you close those bridges, is by putting in these little personal feelings and sensibilities that you have, and somebody else will feel the same thing and think just like me. The Mary Carr who wrote Liars Club.
Oh yeah.
I love that memoir, and I just I just related to it so much. And when I had an opportunity to meet her, I said to her, I'm a Puerto Rican, born and raised in the South Bronx, and I wish you'd stop writing about me. Obviously, her book was, it's about white people.
Right, nothing to do. Yeah.
But I think that was the highest compliment I could pay her, that I felt that close to her story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great story. How did she react?
Oh, she just, she loved it and she laughed, and I had to set it up just right. But I think you could do that with a kid's book too. Obviously, I felt that with the Beverly Clearly's book, 15, and I hope that kids relate to these beautiful characters.
Yes, hold up your book. Yeah. And so, do you want to? Yeah, tell us.
Ana, Zulema, Miguel, and Juan.
Yeah.
He's a fruit seller. He sells frutas, naranjas dulces.
I love it. That cover is so beautiful, and the art inside the book is also lovely for each character. Do you want to read us a little bit, like less than 5 minutes or so, 4 or 5 minutes?
Sure.
And then I'll have one more question for you after that, if there's time.
Okay, I'll read. Okay, this is Ana's story, the very beginning, the first thing you'll read. Ana, Havana, Cuba, 1959. We're almost there, almost at the gate. Chispa, my dog, afraid of the gunshot sounding sharp in the distance, is whimpering in my arms. My mother is just ahead, so close to home, when the rebel grabs her. She squeals. Fear weakens and drains me, but the blood pumping through my body propels me forward. I run and jump onto the rebel's back. My skirt rides up as my legs hook around his waist. His filthy shirt, belt, pants feel slick and grimy against my thighs, but I hang on tight, squeezing with my knees and punching with my fists. He grunts and twists in surprise as Mommy gulps air like a stupid seal. Chispa, who had been so afraid of the celebratory gunshots, is now brave. And my little dog, even while dropped and lost in the tangles of her leash and our bodies, finds a way to latch onto the man's ankle. Caramba, the man curses. Stop, Mommy pleads. But the man won't stop. So like Chispa, I bite right into his ear. Ugh, he grunts, twisting, trying to flick us both away. The top rubbery part of his ear is disgustingly salty. Hair from his head that slips into my mouth tastes like pennies. Stop, Ana. I told you to stop, screams my mother, pulling at me. Me? Did I hear right? Was she talking to me? I find her face over his dirty shoulder. The look in her eyes is wild, crazy, and happy. Ana, she says forcefully, stop. I said, stop. The man's sour breath hits my face. She says it again, stop. The man makes another sound and, grabbing his ear, maneuvers away from me. Caramba. But this time he chuckles. Chispa's barking joins the sounds of cracks in the sky. My mother, calmer now, whispers hoarsely, stop. I said, stop. It's your father, Ana. It's your father. So Ana is reunited with, this is how she's reunited with this man she hasn't seen in a couple of years because he was fighting in the mountains, and he comes back and he feels brave and like a winner, and he's idealistic. And of course, things change and he meets a tragic ending. And Ana has issues with that because, and I was trying to find what's real there. What does everybody relate to? And everybody relates to, as parents, we all tell our kids, it's going to be fine. We tell them that with COVID. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And then when it's not fine, they are mad at us. And so Ana is very mad at her father because it didn't turn out fine. And when she confronts her mother about it, her mother says, "Oh, he wasn't lying to you. He was hoping." So Anna learns the difference between lie to and hope. Like, don't, my mother used to tell me things, "Don't worry, Sonia, you'll get there, you'll do it." And when I didn't think she was,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, you're just not being truthful to me, but she was ever hopeful always. And so that's the lesson that Anna, her change, so that each character has an emotional change like that.
Yeah, no, that's so beautiful, and it's so striking, and it felt so true, that story of so many people that fought in the revolution and really believed in it, were willing to sacrifice everything for it. And Anna's father is that kind of character, and you
Right,
really see
right,
it.
right. And it changed in months. In months, the
Mhm.
whole society changed.
Right, the disenchantment that started very early in the
Right,
revolutionary process.
right.
Well, I was glad you read that. I also want to ask you about Sulema, which I think this might be my last question. So Sulema, you want to talk more about her, is the character in the book who seemed, of all the four characters, the most committed, or the one who is committed to making a life for herself in Cuba. And her life in the countryside is changed in a positive way by the literacy campaign, and she convinces her very hard scrabble peasant father, who at first doesn't see the importance of reading and writing. He's fine just using his thumb, etc. And she convinces him that it's actually good to read and write, and she decides she's going to become a teacher when she grows up. So that would have been in 1961. And so I imagine she would have been born around 1949 or 1950 and would now be around 72 years old. How do you think Sulema's life turned out? What do you think Sulema might be doing today?
I think, I somebody had to stay and have faith in the government, because people are there now. And I read this wonderful book by Anthony De Palma
Oh,
called "The Cubans: Ordinary Lives in Extraordinary Times and the Man Who Invented Fidel." Well, the main character in that book, thought to myself, that's Sulema grown up. She's completely loyal. They make her wait 4 years for an apartment. And then when she doesn't get the apartment, she still does not see how she's been cheated. She still will not give in to this. I'm going to get nowhere ever. And so I think that that's what happened to Sulema. I mean, I think that she stayed there, and she became like this character that I read in the book. And I thought that I liked finding what she was going through was her and her father was afraid of changing anything. And I saw in the documentary Maestras, which is about the brigadistas coming, there's a moment there where the brigadista says that the man's hands were so swollen with, she said, trabajo violente, violent work. And that image stayed in my mind, that you could have a job that's so violent, your hands are like, you can't even hold a pencil. The man couldn't hold a pencil because they were so swollen and so that left an image in my mind, and I wanted this father to be that, and just being frightened that everything was changing in front of him, and realizing that his daughter was better than him because she could see a future and he couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, he could, but it would have been the same routine as always, working
Yeah.
in the fields in the same way. He couldn't get beyond
Right. He couldn't get beyond that.
repetition. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that was so powerful. And it's great that you mentioned Anthony De Palma's The Cubans, because I actually moderated a conversation with him for Books and Books, virtual conversation, I guess about a year ago. And it's a book that I love. I mean, I love his journalism. And and that's so interesting that you connected your Sulema as a young woman with the Sulema in Sulema. character.
With that character that she was from descendants from Jamaicans or something, and you know, I don't remember the details of it. But obviously, I was surprised reading his book that people are there still, you know, supporting. What is it that made Fidel so? I'm saying Fidel now because I was corrected. You never say Fidel Castro; you just say the first name. My research people, that he was so powerful, and it's something I don't. People are still talking about it and will be talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all of us kind of internalized Fidel Castro in one way or another. We all had a little Fidel inside of us. But what's so clear to me is you really did this tremendous research and you did all of your homework. I mean, you know the jokes, you know the stories about Fidel Castro, you know about the Cubans, you know the films. I mean, you really did so much incredible work to bring this book to life. And it's just such a wonderful book, both from a craft perspective, bringing these 4 stories together. And readers who haven't read it yet, I just want to let you know that you'll see how amazingly the 4 stories do connect in ways that we as the reader can see. The characters don't always know how they're all going to connect, but we can see how there are connections. That character, Carmen, who comes in and Anna's story and then comes in again in Zulema's story, and she's the literacy, you know, brigadista, and you know, she comes in, she's the one that's helping Zulema learn to read. And so how you connect from part 1 to part 4 is, so from a craft perspective, it's just such a beautiful book to read. And then from a Cuban, you know, Cuban Revolution perspective and Cuban history culture perspective, you show us so much, you educate us so much, and really show kids, you know, so much of that history in a very, very agreeable and interesting way, and also in a very emotionally profound way as well. So really, really think it's a fantastic book.
Thank you. I love connecting Sulema when I read about the agrarian initiative where Castro decided that country people and city people should meet. And he has all these country people come into Havana and stay with city people. And I thought, well, that's an opportunity to have Sulema meet Anna a little bit and get that fairy tale book, you know, from her. So that was it was a lot of work, but I can't say I felt like it was work. I really enjoyed everything. Everything was like a big meal. Every movie, every book kind of added another component into my Cuban pen of knowledge. I don't know that much about Puerto Ricans.
That could be your next book.
I know. I'll leave it for a Cuban to write.
That's great. Well, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I'd love to keep talking to you, but maybe I should open it up for questions. What do you think?
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay, let me see what some of the questions are. Okay, how long did you work on the book, Sonia?
I handed in my first draft 5 years ago, and before that, I had been working on it. So it really was a very long process. I wrote it from many different points of view. One, I wrote it from the point of view of a dog.
Well, Chispa's there.
Yeah, that sort of, now he's got a small part, but in the beginning he was the main character, and I wanted to sort of make him many different versions. It took me a very long time to find exactly how to do it.
Wow. Share with us something about one of those early versions. What's something that you had to let go of, aside from the telling it from the dog's perspective? Are there other things you had to let go of?
I couldn't, like, a lot of the material that I read said that kids, when they were at the airport, they were in an enclosed glass
Yeah, I've seen that
environment, and they felt like they were I forgot the word in Spanish. Fish in a
una pecera.
Una pecera, like they were in a pecera. So I saw that in many documents that I read, and I couldn't put that in. I saw that people, the night that Castro came in, they broke the parking meters.
Yeah.
Because they were just installed, and I couldn't put that in, so I had to let a lot of that kind of stuff go. I know that some kids had secret meetings, and they would put the shape of a fish outside where there was a secret meeting that was anti-Fidel, and I thought that was, a way of sharing more. So there was um, I couldn't get every single thing, and I could get the fact that everybody believed the bird pooped on Castro's head at one of those rallies, because I read that in enough documents.
Well, that was good. That was a nice detail that was run through the whole story. That was great. Yeah. And how about the 4 characters? Did you have those in mind from the very beginning, the 4 main characters?
Yes, because I wanted to have different classes,
Yeah.
social economic classes, and different races.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I wrote a black, that Juan was a Pedro Pan, and then one of the consultants said they weren't, the poor Afro-Cubano were not part of that program. So then I had to put,
Change that.
they said, no, that would not have been the case. So I had to not do that if that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm. Keeping the accuracy.
Keeping the accuracy, but I did want, so I said, what does, and then I remembered seeing these kids diving for money and I read in Carlos Eire's book, Waiting for Snow in Havana, his books, I mispronounced his name, how he talks about the children diving for coins in the Havana harbor.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me, and of course, in one of the fruit sellers. I mean, that's enough, in songs. I remember a lot of songs from Cuba that had the street vendors singing in the lyric.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the peanut vendor and Manicero. Yeah, that's very much part of the tradition.
Right.
Yeah, let me see what other questions we have here. And I ask the audience to please share your questions with us here. Okay, someone asks, I wonder what are some of the ways you have found successful as ways to dispel prejudice against immigrants in your life? For example, sharing food or music.
Well, obviously, sharing food will always get you in. And of course, sharing what we have in our own lives with other people is always in a sincere way, is a very good thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Let me see. I see some more questions. Someone wants to know, she met Elena or Yarza online, was supposed to meet her in Miami 5 years ago, but we were both sick at the time. She's the retired Vice Minister of Culture in Cuba. Have you ever met her?
No, I only met the people, the cultural experts at the Cuban Heritage Center. I went to Cuba once, maybe 10 years ago, but not in search of the book, in search of the Cuba of my fantasies.
Did you find any of those fantasies?
No, I found other things. The Cuba. I was looking for the Cuba of Oscar Hueles's book of Mambo Kings, the lush, the beauty, the clubs. I mean, I knew that wasn't there, but I could see the remnants, the remnants of it. But I found other things. There was a club of very old Afro-Cubanos who were dedicated to swing music, to big band sounds, and doing the jitterbug. I thought that was fascinating.
That's fascinating. That sounds like another topic for a story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was their whole, mission was to get together and keep the big band sound alive and the jitterbugging music of the when that happened in the 50s, I guess.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you went to Cuba 10 years ago, you didn't have the idea for this book yet.
No, no, no. It was just always something, I wanted to go. I wanted to hear the music. And then this was after, I guess, Buena Vista Social Club was really hot.
Mhm.
And uh, I mean, but it is true that I heard a lot of music. I mean, the Malico was full of music. That's not a cliche. I mean, there were people singing, in the streets and on key.
Mhm. No, there's a lot of street music. It's very, very impressive. On the Malecon once, there was a guy with a guitar who was playing Stevie Wonder songs, and it was just amazing.
Right, right. And the people playing, it's like a box you sit at. It's like,
Mm, mhm.
that was the first time I had seen that in one of the clubs. So, I mean, but you went with a group. I couldn't go away from the group. And,
We'll have to go together sometime.
I my cousin, who's not with us anymore, he as a musician was a musician, and he went to Cuba with a band, and he said, "This is it. I'm staying here. This is where I want to stay." And his wife was saying, "Oh, we can't stay here. No, we're staying. We're staying." And then his flight was delayed a few days. And he said, "Oh, I'll just go to the beach." The minute the band went to the beach, the authorities came and said, "No, you're staying in the hotel until your flight leaves." And then he realized the reality of where he was. He couldn't go to
Mhm.
the beach and play with the band without
Mhm.
somebody looking over his shoulder.
Yeah.
It's a tough lesson. He said, "I'm just going to the beach." Nope, you're staying in your room until the flight.
That's tough. That's tough. Let me see, Sonia. I think we still have a little time. Let me see. There's a couple of more questions here. You've already mentioned a few wonderful books about Cuba, but are there any additional titles that inspired you?
Oh gosh, I think I have everything. Operation Pedro Pan, Yvonne Conde, Dancing with Dictators. I mentioned my friend's book, Luis Santiago.
Mhm.
Uh, Learning to Die in Miami and Waiting for Snow in Havana. The Red Umbrella. Of course, I read all the YA books, certainly. Fleeing Castro, 90 Miles to Havana, My Brigadista Year. Refugee, and the Cubans, as I mentioned, and there's movies also. But James A. Michener wrote about Cuba in some of his stories. There's not just Latinx writers. I read all of that, and the documentaries, the famous The Lost Apple,
Mhm.
which is a little boy who's in this new environment. Um, Maestra, everybody saw that. That's a wonderful thing about the internet. You can, I would look up a documentary, and for a couple of bucks, I could watch it. Before Night Falls is a movie I refer to a lot. It's
Mhm.
the story of Reinaldo Arenas. Uh, Lucia was another movie.
Mhm.
Soy Cuba, which was the Russian propaganda movie.
Mhm.
Memories of Underdevelopment, 1968. That was a wonderful.
Yeah, that's a classic. That one you really, really,
Yeah.
really have to see. Yeah. Speaking of film, there is a question here. Any plans to bring the book to film or television?
From your mouth to God's ear. That's that question. I mean, people always say they're interested in making a movie of books, but it's a very long, difficult journey. There's so much out there, and it's so hard to get something on the air. And there's still, being on television, there's still not enough Latino stories, I don't think, that are being, produced on television or in the movies. Uh,
Mhm.
and there's still kind of some kind of wall, some kind of pushback that keeps those stories from being told, or they just want to tell the same story.
Yeah, that's so true.
Let's do this. Let's do a reboot of this. Let's do this. But there's so many other stories. I just came up with 4, and and there's many more.
For sure. Well, I guess to end, I'd love to know about other books in the works. I know you have a 4-book deal, and this was one of the 4, I believe. Tell us a little bit of what you can tell us about the forthcoming books.
This is one of the 4. I don't know. I think the next one is going to be a picture book. I'm not sure what it's going to be about. But Scholastic is also doing the books for Alma's Way, which is a show I have on PBS about a little Puerto Rican girl who lives in the Bronx and what she does in her mind. So Scholastic is doing those books too, and I've just handed in a version of an original material picture book, and that's different and new for me. Where you do, I don't know if you've done any of this, Ruth, where a book is based on a television series, and that's what I'm fooling around with now.
That is so exciting. I've not done that, so it sounds pretty amazing. That's really, really great. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I think we're getting close to our closing time, and just really want to thank you. It's been such an honor and such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you. Enjoy talking to you.
What a great conversation, and what a beautiful reading. You're such a wonderful reader. You really made the book come alive.
Thank you.
That's great. But I need to ask you both what you think of James Franco being cast as Fidel. Come on, in this new movie about Alina.
I have no words to say on that. I don't know. I just kind of learned about that recently, and I'm still trying to avoid answering something about a puppet that happened at the Sesame Place a few weeks ago.
Oh my God. Well,
I think Fidel Castro must be like cheering in his grave. I mean, he's got an actor who looks like pretty handsome, a handsome Persian.
Well, I think, Sonia, you know more about Cubans than many Cubans. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining Books and Books and Miami Book Fair. Thanks to everyone watching. Please remember you can buy the book by clicking the green button at the bottom of the screen if you want us to send it to you, but you can also come into any one of our stores and we have it there as well. It's been wonderful to listen to you, and we thank you so much. And Ruth, it's always great to see you. So thanks for joining us. And maybe the next time we'll be live and in person in Miami.
Hopefully. Okay.
Okay.
Adios.
Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.